Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and discuss some of humanity's most controversial and intriguing concepts through the lens of skepticism. We have with us today Richard, who is excitable, pedantic, and colorful, Laura, the energetic and passionate chatterbox, and Richard, who is enthusiastic and witty, yet by his own definition, gormless. Today, we are going to be discussing ghosts. So grab your English tea or your triple shot caramel mocha with almond milk, get comfy, and join us as we unpack just what it is that goes bump in the night. So, Richards, it's good to be with you today. How are you both?
Very good. And I like how in the script for the intro, you didn't check that I was drinking English tea, but it's absolutely what I'm drinking. So
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind that being an English person, you're drinking English tea.
I think it's absolutely necessary that as English people, we drink English tea.
Yeah, just like it's un-American for me to not drink coffee. All right, so today's topic is really intriguing. And to be perfectly honest with the audience, we have deliberately underprepared for this. So today's topic is ghosts, which I think is really intriguing because it gets away from some of the more religious supernatural ideas into this more just sort of widespread sort of a supernatural phenomena. So to start, either Richard, I'll let you guys fight over who goes first. What is your concept or what is your take on whether or not there are ghosts and what ghosts are?
I'm happy to start. I think it's interesting because now ghosts sort of fit into quite a few different categories when we think about them. I think in culture, there's sort of the, actual haunted places. I use air quotes a lot for people on the podcast, but actual haunted places with ghosts that are seeking to do harm, or it's like people perceive it as this sort of real actual event that's happening. Whereas there's also this sort of cartoony, sort of playful story ghost that we have in lots of fiction and TV shows and films and things. And so I think it's interesting because we do have those two sort of very different ideas, and they're taken with very different levels of seriousness. And some people are convinced that it's actually a thing in their lives, and other people dismiss it entirely, whether or not they've actually investigated it or sort of thought about it in a skeptical sort of sense. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think especially with how, and I'm not incredibly knowledgeable about this, but how there are similar sorts of ideas in lots of culture across the world, which differ in various sorts of ways, but all we could sort of consider as being ghosts or spirits or those sorts of things as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic, I think.
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure if I'm right in saying this, but I think I'm the only one of us who's actually gone out and done any kind of research or done anything on this subject before. I've actually been a skeptic on ghost hunting nights.
So
you should be
deliberately
running an episode.
underprepared, but you've done actual field work. So.
Okay.
Well, field work's a little bit loose, but yeah. And I've got some idea of the kind of some of the different concepts of ghosts, because there are two competing, as far as I understand it, there are two competing theories as to what they are. One is that they are the spirits of the dead, whether that be a soul, or and not all cultures or religions accept souls as we accept them in the West, but that being the soul or the continuance of the person. And the other idea being what's called the tape recorder theory, where the kind of energy of someone or an event gets absorbed into the fabric of the building or the environment and is replayed like a tape recorder. So it's not so much a continuance of an actual life or a conscious being, but it's just a replaying like you would get on a cassette player or on a video player.
So it's, in that sense, it's kind of like an echo or a wavelength that gets kind of stuck in place.
Yeah.
sort of like a tale where there was an old woman who walks down the corridor every night because she always used to walk down to check on her husband who never came home from. Well, I'm just making some random story, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's not like that ghost of the person interacts with the world or anything. She just walks down that corridor every night, and
It's
that's it.
just a replaying,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's
And
no
there are
consciousness to it.
and there are examples in York, which is relatively close to myself and Richard. There are sightings. I've got to say that in air commas for people who are listening on one of the non-video platforms, that people have had where they've actually just seen things replay. That, for example, in the cellar in York, there was a Roman army scene, and it completely ignored and didn't interact with the person who witnessed it. It was literally just like a replaying of an event. But going off that briefly, one thing I did want to ask, I've asked this question recently and I didn't actually get an answer, so I'm dying to hear Laura's take on this.
No.
Because in Britain, and Richard may disagree with me here, so it'd be interesting if you could jump in if I'm wrong here. Whereas religion's not quite so prevalent as it is in America, I think the belief in ghosts and spirits and lots of woo like that, star signs and things, is held by a pretty large proportion of people in our country. And I'd say well into the 90%, upper 90%. And I was wondering what the American take on that was.
Yeah, so hang on while I Google that percentage really quick. No, I have no idea. So, I do know many, many, many people who have ghost beliefs. It's actually pretty common, but I couldn't give you an idea of the broader populace, like across America, how many people believe, or like the percentage of how many Christians believe versus non-Christians. But
Yeah,
I've
that'd be
known people
interesting.
of all religions, of all walks of life, who have a really strong sense that there's some sort of spiritual world out there that interacts with us that includes the spirit of like people who have passed on, like spirits that are either stuck here. Like I don't know, I've heard different explanations. But yeah, I would say it's pretty prevalent.
I think lots of those ideas are mixed in with sort of latent, watered down, blurry religious ideas that people have. So, like, there are lots of people who would, in Britain, call themselves Christians, possibly more culturally Christians than actively practicing and believing Christians, who have ideas about, heaven and have ideas about what happens when someone passes away. And I do agree with what you said, Richard, in terms of, lots of people have those sorts of interplaying spiritual ideas that are all sort of kind of loosely connected, but are not backed up by anything, and people just sort of accept them without investigating them, like, at all.
Can I just interrupt you and just ask you one thing, Richard? Do you get the phrase, because I get this phrase quite often from people I know who say, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in something.
I've
Yeah.
heard that.
Something.
There's definitely something out there.
Not anything in particular, just
Not
something.
anything, just something vague and undefined.
I think it's hard as well because all of these ideas about like ghosts and stuff are to do with often, death. And I think death's a really hard thing for us as people to tackle generally, individually, because even admitting, that we will ourselves one day die is a difficult concept to think about and to meddle with. And knowing people who we've loved so deeply who have then passed on. You see, even my language is, if they've not passed on anywhere, they've
Crossed
died.
over.
Yeah.
Crossed over onto a better place. And it's all these euphemisms and things which help people have these ideas about that sort of ongoingness and the continuation of someone after they've died, whether or not you have an active Christian, Muslim, whatever belief it is, or like in Buddhism with reincarnation, all that, like, whether or not you have those beliefs, lots of people still cling on to that idea of some sort of next step and the time after death, and people being in a better place, or they're still with me now. And I completely understand that tendency and that will to hold on to those ideas. It makes sense completely in terms of a way of comforting yourself and other people and that sort of thing. But I guess it can also potentially be a dangerous or damaging thing to continue to think about if it's not back to. I mean, certainly it's not the time to start talking pedantically about ideas when, you know, someone's had a passing away of someone they loved or something. But like, I think it can be really damaging holding on to those ideas sometimes, which isn't necessarily 100% related to ghosts, what we're talking about, but I think it's all sort of linked in that general way of, like you were saying, those spiritual ideas in general.
Yeah, I
Oh.
think sorry, Laura, go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I agree with you in a sense that there's sort of a hopefulness there or a wishful thinking
Mhm.
thing. But then there's also this other side, and they're both separate, but I think they intertwine together. I just hit the microphone, so I hope it didn't cause any disturbances. But because I'm active with my hands, there's kind of two things that play into the ghost belief that I find interesting, and one is that like hopefulness and that, well, my loved one isn't really gone, or people can still be with us. But the other side is the something really weird just happened and I have to explain it and my brain has to justify what just happened. And so they can interrelate, but they can also be completely separate concepts where like, oh, this really crazy thing just happened in the next room where there was nobody else in the room and I need to explain it away. And our minds are just terrifically good at coming up with all sorts of crazy justifications. And so I don't know, I think that if we're going to talk about that, I think that there's two sides that we need to kind of discuss.
I think our good minds are good at coming up with explanations because they're really bad at actually interacting with the world. And you know, if there is something that we may see out of the corner of his eye that we're not quite aware of what it is, as we tend to have this thing that, you know, we've not seen it properly, we've not understood it, so we need to create this thing. We need to create this explanation.
Yeah, we have
And
we need to have answers. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to. This is going to be so pedantic, and I apologize, but
Word of the day, pedantic.
I have to do it, and I'm going to get people writing in about this. I know I am, but there's a technical difference between rebirth and reincarnation, and
Okay.
the difference is that rebirth in Buddhism, for example, there is no soul. What there is what's called anatta, which is non-self. So it's not a soul that's reborn. It's aspects of that we cling to of ourself that's reborn. Whereas in something like Hinduism, they have what the concept of anatman, which is a soul. It's a solid soul. It's actually the self that's reborn. So the reincarnation refers to anatman, the self, whereas rebirth refers to anatta, non-self.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
I'm
I need to learn more
expecting
about that.
I
That's
am
confusing.
expecting to get people correcting me somewhere down the line on that. But
No, and I don't think that's pedantic. I think that there's like all these very precise concepts out there, but then people have partial understandings of what they are. And so we spread all these concepts around and we talk about them like we know what we're talking about. And yeah,
I'm
that
really good at talking like I know what I'm talking about.
well, you sound like you know what you're talking about. I don't know. I buy it.
he's the only teacher amongst us as well.
Yeah.
So
Get
you're
paid to
trained
sound
to
like I know
sound
what
like
I'm
you know what you're
about.
talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Slightly worrying for the future of Britain's kids.
Oh, it's all fine.
Or at least the 20 that are in his class, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about two different concepts, and I want to kind of like get into them more and talk more about them. But I wanted to introduce a third concept that we can kind of toss around, and I wanted to know what you guys thought about it. Um, One thing that I used to believe, especially when I was a Muslim, because there's a lot of like in Islam, there's a lot of um, creatures that live on different planes. Like the jinn are people just like us, but they live in a different plane of existence. So one of my concepts of ghosts, back when I was a believer in ghosts, was that they weren't even like the souls of people or anything like that, but they were sort of like these crossover sort of images or sort of this way in which this other plane of existence sort of melts into ours or bleeds into ours or anything like that, like where we can sort of perceive them and they can sort of perceive us, but not
It
fully.
reminds me of about half a dozen Doctor Who scripts that I enjoy watching.
Yeah. So let's talk Doctor Who for the next hour. No, but so what are your guys' thoughts on that really quickly? Like the idea of it not even being a spirit energy or something that is unique to us, but something that's in a completely different. Um,
I've heard of people who even now kind of have the, not from a ghost perspective, but they think that that's how aliens interact with us. And I don't want to go too far down this route because I'm sure we'll have a different episode about that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
they kind of view it as I understand it, is it like a set of frequencies? Like we can see so much on the light spectrum, but we can't
Yeah.
see infrared. And I think people have this idea that realms of existence are kind of the same thing, that they're on a frequency, and where we can only perceive so much of any one frequency and on this spectrum, and that ghosts, or in some cases aliens or other beings like the jinn, probably are seeping through those frequencies, or maybe beings that can interact on more than one of those frequencies at once.
Seeping is a good way of putting it. Yeah. Or like there's sort of a bumping into, like our frequency and their frequency somehow interact
Yeah.
on this very small scale that causes us to observe a phenomena, but it's really just a misunderstanding of this whole other plane of existence.
I think it's interesting as well how, because as uh, as a as cultures, we have all these stories and this sort of latent background knowledge of ghosts as a concept, that people do more easily latch on to ghosts as an explanation for unknown things happening. Whereas I think, if something that someone could potentially class as a ghost sighting or a ghost interaction, if something like that happened to me here in this room now, my brain wouldn't jump to, that must have been a ghost. It must have been the spirit of a dead person who died in this house 100 years ago, this old Victorian house. That wouldn't be where my brain automatically would jump to, but lots of people would, because there's that like I say, latent background understanding of ghosts as a concept. And the question of, well, how else would you explain it? It sounds like a really valid one. But the answer is, I just don't know. There are lots of reasons why something can happen. Gravity is a thing, and sometimes things just happen. And I think jumping to a supernatural explanation rather than thinking through practical natural explanations is certainly an issue.
I
Yeah.
think I think jumping to a supernatural explanation is always the worst possible scenario that you can go to for any given incident that occurs to you in your life.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like the I don't know, therefore God. I don't know, therefore
Yeah.
ghosts. I don't
Yeah.
know, therefore Bigfoot or whatever. Um, yeah, no, I think like you said something, Gil, earlier about how when you would hear something in your room or whatever, you wouldn't automatically think, oh, it's a ghost, right? It made me think of things like orbs, right? So now we have all this, we have electricity that we know about now. We have static, like multiple forms of energy and electricity and gravity and stuff like that. So it's interesting to me that people think of orbs as being part of the spiritual world or somehow being connected with ghosts, when we already know we have so much like physical phenomena that we're just now learning to understand and we're just now discovering. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
It's funnily enough, but I've if you watch this back, if you're watching this on YouTube and you watch this back, and if you look on Gil's camera, you will see several orbs that have
I know
gone
he's
past.
connected.
It's but you know, it's dust particles. It's maybe small insects that the camera's not quite picking up. It's we'll go on to the kind of photography aspect of it, I'm sure, later on, but it's easy if you're that way inclined. If I was watching this and I was that way inclined and I'd seen that, I'd very easily jump to, oh, they're talking about ghosts and they're inviting the energy in because there's orbs appearing. And
Oh, right.
I've seen people do that. I've been on ghost hunts where people have done that, and they've taken photographs and they've said, "Look, there's an orb," and it's clearly you're in a 200-year-old warehouse
With a flash.
Yeah.
A flash.
And people are so readily. I went on one and we took some photographs. It was a really cold night, and the breath coming out your mouth was barely perceptible to while you were just walking along. But if you took a photograph, there was just this huge mist, and it was a clouded mist. It looked like the form of a person. It was just the breath.
I think you'll
And
find 2 megapixel digital cameras are absolutely the tool to discover these ghostly spirits around.
but it's ridiculous to me how someone can. I mean, if you're that way inclined, I shouldn't say it's ridiculous. That's not fair. I don't mean to disparage anyone else, because people have different opinions and different levels of epistemology. But to make that jump without saying either, well, there's a simple explanation for that, or more importantly, I do not know. It is the most important phrase anybody can have in the repertoire.
It's one of my
You know,
favorites, actually.
It is, and it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. No, I'm sure none of us here can say we can't say, any of us, that we're absolutely sure that there's no such thing as ghosts. But if something unexplained happened, I do not know. It's by far the best thing to jump to, rather than, I've just seen an orb, it's the spirit of a dead person.
Have there been any things while you've been doing your extensive field research, Richard?
Yeah. I want to learn more about all this. We're going to let you take the lead on this episode.
Let's do a whole side series exploring all of the experience you've had. But has there been anything when you've been out and about doing things like that where you've thought, yeah, this is an unexplained thing that I don't know the cause of?
Yeah, definitely. I'll tell you what. I don't what is our policy on swearing. We've not really discussed it, have we?
Yeah. It's out there. I've already put it out there. Just go.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've been checking back through still camera footage, and I absolutely shit myself, because I'd been in a room where this woman had told me that it was in an old pub, and this woman had told me that she'd experienced someone watching her in this bathroom while she'd been bathing or showering or whatever,
in a pub,
doing a pub.
Yeah, but bathing or showering in a pub.
Yeah, in that she was resident there.
Like up above it.
Yeah, she didn't just go for a pint.
Okay, so like living
a pint in a shower.
Like, where's the shower in our pubs in America?
Not just have showers in the corner.
But no, so she took us round, and we'd kind of done this. I took a few photographs, and there were 2 photographs that had come out, and in my immediate reaction. And this is funny, because Richard was saying earlier, you immediately jump to think, you immediately rationalize it, but you don't always immediately rationalize it. And looking back through these photographs, and there was something like 200 photographs on this camera, and most of them there was orbs, but nothing else. But on these 2 particular photos, which were taken seconds apart, there was just what I can only describe as a big, shapeless, black mass. And from between the 2 photographs, it had moved. And like when I was just, bear in mind, I was just clicking through these things, and it just came as, I didn't expect to see anything untoward, and it just came as a complete shock, and I absolutely shit myself. I thought, what is that?
I'm just listening to you talk about it.
No,
I know, I'm getting creeped out. Like
this is how how we like immediately, how easy it is for our minds to be fooled. And I think the kind of rational explanation is, it was next to a road, and it was probably, I can't say definitively, but it was probably a car that had gone past, and its headlight had cast a shadow in the bathroom while I was taking the photograph. But I don't have an explanation for it. I can't say that for certain. That's what I think it probably was.
It's one of those where, if we listed all the possible explanations, that'd be certainly further up the list.
far further up. But at the time, when I was just flicking through the photographs, I didn't have a clue. And I've been on other ones on this. I don't know if you've heard of the Stocksbridge bypass, Richard. It's quite a famous ghost location. It's not far from where I live, and there was a monk seen walking across this road, apparently, and we went on one there, and me and my friend, we saw. Again, it was a dark night. There were lights flickering past, because the bridge literally crosses one of the main roads between Sheffield and Manchester. So it was a dark night. We'd seen it was raining really heavily, and we saw what we perceived to be just this black shape walking across. Obviously, that's what had been described in the kind of by other witnesses, inverted commas, to this sighting. And on first glance, you get this freezing, oh my God, what's that?
And your
But
mind automatically
yeah,
justifies that,
I'm
oh, it's that thing.
because you
Yeah.
know the story.
Yeah, so your mind is already primed for it, already prepped, already ready to accept. But if I see
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
confusing, that justifies that story.
There's nothing wrong. I don't think, and I'm sure there are people watching this saying, "Well, you're foolish. You shouldn't have done that because it was obvious that that's just your mind playing tricks on you." When you're in the heat of the moment, that's
Feels
not
real.
always the case. The important thing is that you can check your epistemology. You can check yourself, and after seeing it, after that initial shock, you can say, "Actually, no, I don't know what that was." There's actually no evidence whatsoever that it was a monk. I didn't see a monk walking across a bridge. I just saw a black indiscernible shape when I'm on a bridge on a rainy night when it's dark with lots of cars going underneath with the headlights reflecting.
And did you both see the same thing at the same time?
We both saw a shadow.
Okay, so there's some sort of like phenomena out there, but it's just unexplained.
It's probably not even a phenomena.
No, it's probably like a shadow is what I mean, but something happened.
But when you're in that position and you're in that situation, it's very easy to. And I am I'll not say I'm the most rational person out there. I'm certainly very rational, and I'm not prone to flights of fancy. But when you're in the heat of the moment, and things like that happen, there is that initial, and it is just a split second. What is that? And then you're like your rationality kicks in and you realize that you've not seen anything at all untoward.
I think it's that evolutionary sort of part of us, like deep in our, I'm speaking unscientifically now, but like our reptilian brain people talk about, like that deep-seated like flight or fight response with things like, is the rustle in the grass a lion or is it just the wind?
Yeah.
My brain's better off thinking it's a lion and getting away because I'm safe. It's that sort of idea of like, trying to keep out of danger. And I guess we've not let go of that. Now we're not in a situation where we're having to run away from predators and all that sort of thing. And it kind of works in the same way.
Yeah, and to follow on from that, and Laura may be able to offer some insight into this as well. I'm a former martial artist. I still know how to do martial arts, but
like not former, just unpracticed.
I don't practice, but Laura, Laura's will have had fight training and stuff, and you kind of that. When I was taught how to fight, I was taught how to use that flight or fight in an unnatural way, not to react to it but to be aware that you've got that jump, you've got that thing, and to react to it in a way that's going to help you rather than just legging it and being safe. So, and that, do you agree, Laura? Is that something that you were taught?
Yeah. Okay. So it's exciting that you were talking about that because I think that there's multiple different ways that we can handle that response. And I think that what you said about the fighter and how the fighter interacts with their fight or flight response and how they're taught to rush into danger instead of away from it. It's kind of the same as a soldier. That's kind of what the skeptic is taught too. Like when you get that initial shock, like you're actually taught like these self-calming techniques. They're like, so everyone gets that same initial fear, that jolt of adrenaline, all the negative hormones rushing through your body. But it's the skeptic who says, oh my God, my mind is freaking out right now, instead of saying, oh my God, something out there is happening. So I think that that's really interesting that you specifically keyed in on that, because I think that that is a coping mechanism that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah.
But then also talking about the fight or flight, when we're taught ghost stories and we do have that initial fight or flight response and we're more susceptible to believing, that response alone reinforces our belief. So I had this experience and I had a reaction to this experience and it was real. And the more that we're in that like adrenaline, heightened emotion, heightened thoughts, like very, very, everything's happening really quickly. It kind of, when you're in that stressful situation, it seems like things slow down and you seem to observe a lot more than you're actually observing. That reinforces that what is that called? Not spiritual, the belief in ghosts. What is that called?
Is there a word for that?
It reinforces.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, because that feeling and that experience is so real, so that it
Yeah.
couldn't possibly have been anything else. So I just think that's really interesting.
And that's why I wanted to raise that. Sorry, Richard, I'll just briefly interject and then I'll let you speak. I feel like I've been doing most of the talk in this episode,
This is
so
your
I
episode.
apologize to both of you. But I think that's why I wanted to raise that and just bring aware to people that just having that initial shock, having that initial non-awareness of what it is, but that there's nothing wrong with that. And I think some people think that's a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing in and of itself. It's how you react.
Mhm.
And as we've known, been taught how to fight, and as you say, how the skeptic knows, there's nothing wrong with the initial reaction. It's how you respond, and that is the important part of it. That's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. It's your turn.
Sorry, I was just wanting to pick up on, you mentioned, Laura, about stories, and I think ghost stories are a really interesting aspect of all of this in terms of, because humans are brilliant at telling stories and we really value stories about things. I could even turn what Richard talked about, the shadow on his photo on that trip, into a really exciting ghost story that I could tell people and they'd be interested to hear about it.
Mhm.
And they'd be, you know, when you've said to me already, Richard, just telling that story, that it was probably just a car passing and a shadow moving, I could turn it into a really interesting story that people would be really intrigued to hear about. They may even decide to pass on. And I think especially scary stories about stuff like that, people really, really latch onto. We love being scared in a safe way by listening to a scary story. You know, my son at the moment's reading the poem "The Highwayman" about the highwayman who comes and he's riding on the moor, and then he comes back and he gets shot, and then this ghost carries on going. You know, it's a story about love and about passion and about death and tragedy and horrors, and it's a story that then reinforces this idea that people pass on, and I think that sort of enjoying being scared about something. I mean, it's a big reason why people go on these ghost hunting trips and all that sort of thing, and watch all the shockingly awful TV shows about all of that as well, and stuff.
Terrible
But
recordings.
yeah, you know, you go on YouTube and you can find all the top 10 unexplained video things of whatever, and it's fun to think about and be sort of scared about that sort of thing. And again, that reinforces all these ideas that, oh, maybe this is actually a thing.
So
It's fun to do as well, to go on these ghost hunts. I've been with friends on them, and you know, even as a skeptic, you can still enjoy yourself doing that kind of thing, and there is an element of excitement to it.
And how to enjoy themselves. I didn't get that memo.
So Gil brought up the whole thing about like the way that it makes you feel. I think that to a certain degree we're kind of like adrenaline junkies. And I was reading a book recently, I can't remember the name of it, but it compares a crush. Like when you first fall in love with someone, that feeling that's like really overwhelming, the butterflies, they say that physiologically it's the exact same physiological response as the fight or flight response. So literally when you're in that like brand new stressful sort of lovesick state, you're literally caught in an drawn out fight or flight response. And so when we think in terms of why people like to go ghost hunting, or why people are so drawn to the idea of the ghost story or so attracted to believing it, if you think about it, as soon as you get that shot of adrenaline where like you hear a bump in the night and it's the middle of the night, it freaks you out and you're scared out of your mind, you can't sleep for the rest of the night, but your body is kind of addicted to that, sort of like that. And this is just a guess, I'm just kind of throwing it out there because we're so drawn to that adrenaline rush that I think it kind of fuels the belief even further, because if you stopped believing, you're going to stop getting that rush. So I'm interested to know what the psychological links are between what we experience having a ghost experience and how that reinforces or fuels our propensity to believe.
That's a good question, and I think I don't know. I know Darren Brown's done some stuff regarding belief and the links between belief and psychology. There's a really good book which I just happen to have
Oh, on your
a copy
Dance
of
podcast?
here, called I don't know if you can see that, Paranormality
Yeah.
by Professor Richard Wiseman. And that actually goes into, it's got experiments in as well with barcodes that you can actually go and have a look at things on YouTube and things. But you can, that's got experiments in about how we link to things and how we perceive things that we consider paranormal, but it's actually just normal psychology. So
we just put in that different category. We
What's that?
take that thing that is a normal part of psychology, a completely normal thing, that we just allocate that supernatural label.
Yeah, because we don't understand the brain at all as lay people, and I'm certainly not an expert in psychology or anything. No, as lay people, we don't understand how the brain works.
No.
It's just, I mean, I think as skeptics, we have maybe more of an understanding than the general public, but we don't really understand how we interact with the world. It's even seeing is not what we perceive it to be. You know what I mean? And
that's a good point.
When you look into things like that, it's like the question of how big is space. It's like a mind blown moment when you really start looking into that kind of things.
Yeah,
Is it the first, by the way, of a regular segment of Richard's book review? Because you've got all the books behind you, obviously. So
we should do like a quick minute of each podcast. Be like, and today's book review by Richard is. No, but for those of you listening who didn't see the picture of the book, I will, or whichever one of us uploads the podcast, will add the title of that book into the description in case.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that we weren't a
Hey, no,
purely
that's
video
cool.
format.
Yeah, so audio listeners, we got you covered. But Gil, so you were talking about kind of what Gilliver said, and so I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to throw that out there.
I misheard what you said. Sorry, say that again for me.
Oh, I threw out there the whole book thing while you were trying to say something. I cut you off like a total.
I don't think I was. I just wanted to come back to something that I've talked about on my channel a bit and on the Street Epistemology podcast with Anthony Magnabosco about a street epistemology style conversation I had with my son about ghosts. So my eldest son is 9, and we talked about ghosts, and I can't really remember exactly the context of how it came up, but we were definitely in the hot tub during the first lockdown last year. We spent far too long in the hot tub, but he just said a passing remark about, but obviously ghosts exist. And sort of even from his sort of standpoint as a 9-year-old, and obviously he's not been brought up in a religious household. It doesn't, we've definitely never actively pushed any of these sorts of ideas onto him, but he just had this sort of default position of, well, yeah, they probably do exist. And I think I go into it in a lot more detail on my channel, but like, the reasons that he gave were sort of like prevalence in culture and popular culture and media, as well as sort of this, I guess, basic standard model of how it all works. And because of all that was sort of presented to him as a 9-year-old child, not having really that much experience of the world as a whole, as much as an adult necessarily has, just kind of accepted by default that, yeah, ghosts are real. Because it not necessarily been given the space or the opportunity to interrogate those ideas and to investigate any of those concepts. It's like when you first have to explain to children that dinosaurs died millions of years ago, because they see dinosaurs in cartoons and films and stuff, and actually, they also see lions and giraffes and other things that do exist, but they haven't seen them in real life. But dinosaurs don't exist anymore as living creatures, and it's that same sort of thing of like having to explain that to children and not letting them carry on with those false ideas about what's real and not to tell them, no, they don't exist, because like you said, Richard, earlier on, there's no way of us knowing whether or not they actually exist necessarily. There's no way that we can know that they don't exist. But to just open that conversation and open that dialogue to start asking those questions.
It's so easy to believe as well, because I mean, my being incredibly old, when I was a young man, the first Ghostbusters film had come out. So it was just kind of the norm. I think everybody, but like we said at the outset, in Britain, everybody believes in ghosts. It's not one of those things that is questioned.
It's something that's really taken for granted. I think that's true, because it's such a natural part of our culture that permeates through everything. And if you're just introduced to something as just part of reality, extricating that from your reality can be really difficult. Like if someone like today told me that the sky wasn't actually blue, that like it's actually this other color and I just have a problem seeing it or whatever, I would have a really hard time digesting that. Like I couldn't pull what I know to be my reality and change it that easily. There would be like an adjustment period. And
That's because I'm colorblind, so like I don't perceive color in the same way as most normal color vision people do, and so like I can look at a scene. We could be stood on top of a hill looking down over a wooded dale, and like my wife or whoever I'm with, I know sees that picture in front of them differently, and it's difficult for me to understand how people could see more color than I see, because I look at the world and I see a colorful world. Someone else sees a much more vividly interesting and dynamically colorful world, and that's still something that I struggle to um, sort of get my head around, because I cannot perceive what extra color they would see, because I've never experienced that extra color. And I guess that's sort of a similar idea in terms of what you were saying, Laura, with these other ideas about ghosts.
yeah, I think a lot of times that we get these like I don't know what you would call it, kind of like pictures in our head of what reality actually is. And when you teach kids young, like you're doing, and like I'm doing with my kids, when you teach them young to just sort of question those pictures and to hold them really loosely, I think that's where you get more skeptical thought and more people who are willing to withhold judgment. But it's when you have gone your whole life just thinking this and never being challenged, then when you finally are challenged, it's very, very hard to find a good reason to let go of those beliefs. And so things like ghosts that it seems so outdated in like our modern scientific world to even like believe in that kind of stuff from a skeptical perspective. It feels really like, aren't we beyond this? But when we think about it, the average experience of a human being um, is not that technical and that scientific. It's very just experiential, and that experience is something that we still take for granted.
Definitely, yeah. And we are experiential beings. We don't sit down and try and work everything out and dot every I and cross every T when we're trying to figure out the world around us.
So,
Shall we?
go ahead.
Sorry, Laura, go on.
No, I was gonna try and introduce a new subject, so I think it's your turn. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I've done quite a lot of talking. So I want to raise something, and I want to let you two talk amongst yourselves about it for a little while. On one of my many research projects, as Richard calls them, I actually got into quite a lot of trouble from the people who'd organised the ghost hunt, because they had what was, I call it a tipping board, but I don't know if that was that. It was more of a tapping board. I don't know enough to know what the technical term is. It was essentially a table, and everyone had to stand around the table, put their hands on it. The psychic medium, and I can't not do
The
the
quote.
the air commas when I do that. But the psychic medium had said, we're going to put his hands on the table, going to ask some questions, and it's 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. And this went on for, I don't know how long, a minute or so, until I'd pressed quite hard on the table, quite by accident, I might add. I wasn't going out to try and debunk anything. And I kind of realized that there was a mechanism built into this table
Oh no.
where the pressure you put on the table affected the answer you got from the table. So I started to have a little bit of fun, and the psychic was asking questions, and and the leading, I can't remember the exact situation, it was a few years ago now, but leading the punters, I suppose you'd call them, along, and I started pressing the table a little too hard, a little too softly when it wasn't wanted, and I literally got asked to leave the table.
Oh
I
no,
was
because your psychic
literally
energy was interrupting the.
because pretty much, yes. They told me that I was being disruptive and I was stopping the spirits coming through properly, and they knew, and I knew, that the actual reason I'd been asked to leave the table was that I'd figured out their scam.
Yes, and you were disrupting their flow, which they have to heavily control. Yeah.
So what's kind of your two opinion on in particular things in like that where people deliberately go out to try and con people, and in a larger picture, what's your opinion on the fact that we have people who are psychic mediums, celebrity psychic mediums, who are earning thousands and thousands of pounds from doing this? Do you think there should be stronger regulation in that area?
Honestly,
I think so, yes, but I'll let Laura start because she's started before I did. So go for it.
I was gonna say, honestly, that should almost be like its own podcast episode, because to me, psychic mediums, that whole genre of activity, is its own conversation that that I think we can get more heavily into, especially in terms of conning. But if we want to keep it in like the ghost context, but still kind of touch on what you're talking about, I wonder about that a lot with like the haunted houses, where you have people who manage like these old hotels or like an antique shop or something, and there's these stories, and guests come and they have these experiences. That is something that I do wonder about, whether we can draw a conclusive conclusion, whether we can come up with a conclusive answer or not. That's
Thinking a
something
lot of those places like that can be just for fun, like if you go to, like you mentioned York, Richard, is a place where there's lots of places like that because York's such an old city where there's been plenty of death all over the shop there. And I think, going for a haunted tour around this place or whatever as a bit of fun with your mates can be a great evening's entertainment, can't it? And actually, it's not an element of them trying to con you out of money or trying to con it's just an enjoyable thing. If you learn a bit of history, you have this sort of scary, exciting experience, and it was a bit of fun. You take a good photo for Instagram, and you get on with your life. But there's a difference between that, isn't there, and the people who are sort of really heavily invested in that side of things too.
Yeah, so I think the difference would be whether or not there's any sort of deliberate misleading of people. So if it's just like a historically haunted house and everyone kind of accepts that, oh, we've had these experiences and it's haunted, and you've got somebody managing it and they're, getting paid to let people come in and see it, I don't really have an issue with that, as long as they're not creating sounds or using mechanisms to create experiences. I think it's when they know that it's not haunted and they're deliberately kind of creating this environment and then presenting it as actually haunted. They're not saying, here's a haunted house experience. It's not really haunted, but come have this experience. They're saying, yeah, this house is haunted, but then they're creating. So it would be the difference between, oh, this house is just really weird and weird things happen in it. And, oh no, the owner of the house is deliberately setting up mechanisms or devices or whatever to make people think that they're having these experiences.
It's
Yeah,
interesting. We talked about sort of the link between these ghost ideas and sort of latent background religious ideas and things, but then there's also the sort of uh, especially, I'm thinking Christian ideas here of like, the pushback against like Halloween and those sorts of things where like ghosts are sort of celebrated in that sort of cartoony abstract sense. And it's sort of a place where actually that certainly doesn't apply, and it's very much the opposite. Go on, Richard, what were you saying?
I've forgotten.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Can't have been important if I've forgotten it. Talking about the cartoony aspect, though, just to interject while someone thinks of something serious to say, we can never ever get rid of Scooby-Doo. I won't allow it.
Oh, you know what I love about Scooby-Doo is they show that every single supernatural thing that they encounter always has a human element to it. Like,
Yeah.
I love Scooby-Doo, and I love letting my kids watch Scooby-Doo. I think that that's the best education in ghost and supernatural phenomena that you could provide to a child.
In fact, Laura, would you just go back and delete this episode and we'll just air an episode of Scooby-Doo instead of all of
Perfect. So goodbye, everyone. Enjoy your Scooby-Doo.
So what about, we've touched upon people who are deliberately conning people, and yeah, we will do a separate episode on that which delves into that much further. But what about people who believe it, who aren't conning people but are making money off it? How do we approach those kinds of people?
You You want to take it, Richard, or you want me to take it?
Go for it.
Okay. I think it's the same as the church. I think it, so to me, it's, you can't really stop it. And legally or morally, I don't even know where to start with that. I think it would be something that we'd really have to like, we as like a society would really have to come to some sort of decision about. But that happens all the time. Psychic mediums, the church, ghost hunters, like, where do you draw the line? Honestly, like, I'm just as much against it as I am against the church collecting money for their claims, and being able to do the things that they can do. Now, charities that are run by church, different. Like for all you listeners out there, the churches that take that money and they go help people and it's donations for charity, great stuff. When you're talking about donating to an idea, like the idea that Jesus is the risen Lord, or the idea that the psychic medium is going to read my palm, or the idea that this guy is going to take me on a ghost hunting adventure. I think that there should be a level of scrutiny involved to allow those kinds of businesses. But
Because I think it's easy to say, well, if people are happy to spend that money on that cause, on that person, on that organization, on that idea, then fair enough. But I think it's hard to know the difference between someone who's just happy and willing to spend that money on that aspect of their life and someone who is manipulated or sort of
Mhm.
pushed into that situation as well. It's a hard distinction to draw.
Yeah,
And I also think it's not only, I don't think it's just as simple as saying if they're happy to do it, let them do it, because some of these things can be inherently harmful, and they might be happy to do that, but they might also be being really harmed by that at the same time. And I think there's too many instances of either the programs or these people who take people on tours of supposedly haunted buildings and things, where there's a little bit of small print that says for entertainment purposes only,
for
and
legal reasons.
that seems to cover them for the fact that they're blatantly lying to people in a lot of cases. But legally they're covered because they've just said it's up to entertainment purposes, and if you're willing to spend your money on that, then you're allowed to be psychologically damaged for maybe the rest of your life because someone's put a small disclaimer in.
So
And
wouldn't a good solution then be like more education and teaching kids and young people more critical thinking and skepticism, so that it's not about, you can't eliminate the con artists, you can't eliminate the people that are gathering money based on lies, but you can increase the amount of people that won't buy their BS.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think that relates in general into a lot of areas. I remember when I was growing up, and again, we're going back a long way. When I was younger, Britain had 4 seasons, and for anyone who's a climate change denier, I defy them to come and tell me that there's no such thing as climate change, because now the weather is completely erratic. And I'm just thinking about all those poor people in Texas at the moment. I've got friends in Texas who are really suffering. People are dying,
Yeah.
and it's largely because of climate change. And there's people out there saying this thing doesn't exist and it's ridiculous. And I've seen firsthand that the climate has changed, but the generation before me, they weren't interested in doing any kind of environmental activism or anything. There were pockets. I'm not saying it was completely because obviously in the
It wasn't
60s and
mainstream.
this, no, not at all. And my generation, we had people coming into school telling us about climate change, and from my generation onwards, people are much more aware of it now. And it doesn't really, without meaning to be rude to anyone who's older than me, it doesn't really matter what the older people think, because they're not one who are going into the future and teaching their children. And if we can teach children about critical thinking and skepticism and how to understand and analyze these things, then it doesn't matter if the parents believe in ghosts or psychic or mediums, because they're the ones who are going to be teaching their children. And I
Yep.
think that's the way we should address it, rather than laying down a whole body of legislation saying you cannot do this. We should have better education in schools, vitally in schools,
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
and to teach people about. I mean, Richard's probably in a better position to talk about what the education system is actually like, rather than us. But that would be my idea. Get the young people taught about critical thinking, about skepticism, get them learning that these things can actually be analyzed and you can understand them for what they are, and let them move, rather than trying to put a flat out legislation out and stop people having fun and going on like the York dungeon tours or the London dungeon tours, which are just purely entertainment, and let people do them rather than blanket legislating against and lumping genuine entertainment in with con artists. Let us teach the young people how to think properly and let them move the world forward correctly.
Amen,
I think
brother.
that
Yeah, I
distinction.
did go a bit preachy then, didn't I?
I love
Sorry.
it. Nope.
Yeah, I think it's that difference between, teaching people what to think and teaching people how to think.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
knowing how to teach people how to think is then the sort of step behind that, which is, difficult. And yeah, I think, asking questions like, how do you know that?
Mhm.
Or why do you think that? And I think, I've got experience and knowledge about, street epistemology and things, and I've spoken about that before. And I believe both of you have as well. But just that sort of investigative questioning of what you think, what other people think, why people think it, is really valid. Linking that to sort of religious ideas and stuff, if people asked more, why do you believe that, rather than just accepting things, I think people would more critically look at teachings from the Bible, or and I know this is sort of not linked to the ghost stuff, but it is from what you were saying, Richard, in terms of we know that because it's in the Bible. Well, why do you believe that the Bible is a source of evidence or a thing to be trusted? Oh, well, because of this. Or, well, how do you know that? And I think keeping on going at getting to the root causes of ideas, the roots of inspiration for things or reasons for things is vital in loads of areas, and especially in terms of things which could be potentially damaging to people. Believing in God or believing in ghosts or believing in aliens doesn't necessarily inherently cause anyone damage in any sort of way in and of itself. It's what you do with that information, how you let it affect your life, and how you let it affect the decisions that you make and the judgments that you make that affect other people. And that's where there can be issues. And I think, yeah, it's what skepticism is about, obviously, isn't it? Like interrogating those ideas and thinking, why do I think this? Why do you think that? Is the crux of all of it, really. And yeah, I agree with basically everything you said, Rich, about education being a great place for that, because it's somewhere where you there's that disconnect between the family environment where you are, which might hold a certain religious or spiritual idea, you with other people with other ideas and other sort of backgrounds and things. It's why this conversation between us three is working so well, because we've got commonalities, but also a range of experience and ideas and perspectives. That's really valuable, and I think is absolutely one way of going about trying, however helplessly it might be, to tackle this sort of ideas and problems.
What is the state without going into too much detail, but what is the kind of general state about critical thinking and skepticism in school? Is it taught?
Um, uh, no, not. I mean, it would be up to individual teachers, essentially. I mean, there are aspects of the national curriculum in terms of looking at ideas, but it certainly isn't a big focus. The curriculum moment's very knowledge based. So knowing things is more important than thinking about things in a certain way, because knowing things passes tests. And so, and obviously, we get judged as a country educationally compared to other countries based on passing tests. And obviously those league tables are more important than thinking skeptically about things and interrogating ideas. Obviously, that's a broad statement that I've just made, and is certainly not applicable to every,
Disclaimer.
yeah, legal
FYI.
for entertainment purposes only. But yeah, so it's not there in a big way, and certainly when you as teachers are incentivized to get children to pass tests, um, it's hard sometimes to justify that prioritization.
So I love that you said that, because while I was waiting for my turn to talk, this is what I was thinking about like the whole time was getting kids to be comfortable saying and to give them the permission and the freedom to say, I don't know. Because pretty much their entire education from the time they start, for us, it's elementary school. I don't know what you guys call it, primary school, or I don't know what it's called, but um, up till they graduate or go off to college is that you have to know the answer. And if you don't know the answer, you're wrong or you're deficient or you're stupid. And so a lot of times, like there's an innately, like it's taught from such an early age that it's more important to have an answer than to have the right answer or to not have any answer at all. So I think if we could get kids more geared toward, I don't know, or let's go find out. Me homeschooling my kids, I'm in a really like unique and pretty awesome situation where I get to decide like how much I expose my kids to or don't and how much I let them explore learning on their own. And so I get to teach them that and I let them hear me say I don't know as often as possible. But if we could do that for children along with the critical thinking and along with the skepticism, it will alleviate a lot of that pressure to come up with answers and like even if they're bad ones. you know, I don't know.
Often even adapting the answer of I don't know to I don't know yet as well. Like it
Sure.
doesn't have to be I don't know full stop.
Right.
Often the I don't know question is a really good leap pad onto finding out an answer that might just not be known yet. And so that word yet is also an important one, I think.
So one thing that we're taught in the military in giving briefings is because we have to, you research the briefing and you have all the information, and then at the end, guaranteed, there's gonna be someone like an officer or something that asks a question that you don't know the answer to. And so we're taught as briefers to say, I don't know or I don't have that information right now, but I will get back to you on that. And then we're taught to follow up, like we're supposed to send an email or walk over to their office or look it up and reapproach it and tell everybody like, okay, this was the answer and follow up with that. So it's interesting that you say that. Like, I don't know yet, but I will find out for you.
Yeah.
But what if you can't find out?
Then you follow up and say, I don't know. We weren't able to find the information you were looking for.
See that's I think that's equally as important to be able to say we don't know. We
still don't know.
we maybe not know yet, but it may present itself in the future. But there is a chance that might not be the case. That doesn't mean we should jump to a conclusion
Ever. Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, I
Would
think
you guys like to
it's
call it there? That's a good stopping place.
I think it's a decent time. So I think we went off track a little bit with the ghosts.
But you know
That's
what?
what these conversations are about. Yeah.
Rabbit holes. Those are my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're supposed to take it where we take it. And I like where this one went.
Agreed.
Cool.
Okay. So are we ready to close this out?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you everybody for listening. It was a great episode and I had a lot of fun. Once again,
Okay.
we are Laura,
Richard.
And Richard. And this is the Skeptic Hangout. Until next time.
keep questioning.
Interrogate your beliefs.
And stay skeptical. Thanks very much.
Peace out, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.